And thank you for staying with us. In light of the police involved death regarding George Floyd in Minneapolis, many people in the community were urging for reforms to hold law enforcement accountable as for their actions, as well as addressing police practices. And then the important law, 50A, which deals with police and misconduct and brutality. Well, the 50A law was signed into legislation by Governor Cuomo last week. We asked the question now, what provisions do these laws mean moving forward? Joining us now to give us more information and provide further insight is the New York State Senator of District 36, Jamaal T. Bailey. And Senator Bailey, good to have you.
Darren, it was a pleasure. I hope you and your family holding up well during this coronavirus, even as we enter phase two. So,
Yeah, we're holding up pretty good, and I hope you're holding up too good. And we're glad that we can still do some things virtually.
absolutely.
Yeah. So let's get at it. Listen, as we said, the governor signed into law 50A. We know that that was a legislation that went up and down Albany. A lot of people have been talking about it for a minute. But first of all, give us your thoughts on 50A being signed into law.
Well, I'm excited. I was the sponsor of the bill, so it was my bill that we were able to get across the finish line. But I want to say thank you not just to the legislative leaders, Speaker Hasty and Leader Stewart Cousins, and my colleagues in government, but most importantly to the mothers of the movement and the families and the people who let their voices be heard. And they let the 8 minutes and 46 seconds of atrocity be a clarion call to the country that no longer will we stand for this nonsense. No longer will we accept subhuman treatment. We will make it loud and clear that Black Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter not just in protest and in policy. So I'm very excited that we've got this first step towards the right direction done in 58.
Yeah, and let me talk about public trust because we know that there has been this huge fraction between police and community. Given the fact that you now have 58 in as law, do we find that this is going to be a community bridge? Because we've heard on the part of certain law enforcement, of course, this is not something that they're really going for.
Well, I remain hopeful that we can continue to strengthen the bonds between police and community. I am not an anti-police person or a legislator. I've never been that. And unfortunately, what happens when you try to do anything that relates to policing, people tend to muddy the waters and they try to say that you're trying to be or attempting to be anti-police. It couldn't be any further from the truth. So, Darren, as a lead sponsor of this legislation, I held two hearings last October, one in Albany and one in New York City, to ensure that I elicited conversation and comments from not just my side of the perspective, but law enforcement. And the resounding conversation, the resounding issue that law enforcement members had was an issue of privacy. That they said they didn't want their families' names, addresses, social security numbers, those things getting out in the public sphere. I agreed with them then, and I agree with them now. And that was something that we were able to put into the law, into the legislation. That while we repealed Section 58, we were able to strengthen the FOIL. We were able to strengthen the public officers law around FOIL, meaning that these records, the personal records, has no business in the public sphere. Nobody has the right to go to harass or annoy or bother an officer or their family. I'm going to be very clear about that. But the original intent of the legislation back in 1976, Senator Frank Padovan, the legislation was intended to stop that type of harassment and annoyment, not to serve as a bar on disciplinary records. So it's just to understand where we've been to get where we're going.
Yeah. Let's walk through a little bit about 50A. I want to talk about the Office of Special Investigation within the Attorney General's office that allow for the impartial investigation of police misconduct in the state and across the city.
So that's a different bill. That's a special prosecutor bill. So we were able to pass a number of bills in the state legislature last year that the governor signed into law in the last week or 10 days. And the special prosecutor bill is another bill that I've carried, and that relates to the investigation of unarmed killings. Excuse me, when law enforcement is involved in the killing of an unarmed individual. It also allows them to investigate if there is a question as to whether the individual, the decedent, as it were, was unarmed or not. So like there are a number of different bills that work in concert together. 58 was important. Special prosecutor. Another bill that I sponsored was the medical attention bill. Myself and Assemblymember Natalia Fernandez, the Andrew Kearse Act, as it were. Andrew was a Bronx man who was in police custody in Schenectady, and he was taken into custody, and he indicated multiple times that he couldn't breathe and that he was having significant concerns. And this was all captured on dash cam. And Mr. Kearse, unfortunately, died because of a heart attack. And so that law would require officers or law enforcement members that if somebody in custody is requesting medical care, that they have a duty to request. They don't have a duty to perform that necessarily, but they have a duty to ensure that they're calling for medical attention. So a lot of these bills work in concert together, and it's important that we got them done as a package, not just one-offs.
Well, Senator Bailey, thank you so much for being with us. We got to leave it there. Great legislation. I think a lot of people are going to be talking about this for some time to come. A landmark legislation here in the state of New York. Senator Jamaal Bailey, the sponsor of that. And we thank you so much for being with us here on Open.
Daren, thank you so much for everything that you do for us. I appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, Senator Jamaal Bailey, our guest here on Open. Listen, stay with us. We do have more show coming up. We'll be right back right after this.